A family accused of killing a man during an apparent exorcism believed that he had been possessed by a demon, a court has been told. Kennedy Ife, 26, died in his home in Enfield, North London, on the 22nd of August 2016 after he was allegedly tied up using cable ties, rope and handcuffs as his family tried to cure him. He had apparently become unwell 2 weeks earlier and had complained of pain in his throat and difficulty sleeping. A few days later Mr. Ife apparently complained about a python or a snake inside him. The court heard that Colin Ife, Kenny's brother, had told police something took over his brother that was not natural before relatives decided to restrain him. In a police interview, the 26-year-old said there was another personality coming through his brother in the days leading up to his death. It's clear that thing was in him, what we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him, he said. We had to restrain him for himself. It was clear if we didn't restrain him, he could have tried to harm people in our family. He told officers Mr. Ife was hearing voices and had mentioned a joke he made about the number 666 when he was a teenager, like he was regretting something. Colin Ife said his brother seemed to improve at times when the family prayed for him, but added, at a certain time of night, like a full moon, it would just click. He told police the family, who jurors have heard hold deep charismatic Christian beliefs, removed all the knives from the kitchen and decided to restrain Mr. Ife when he became aggressive and tried to get into his mother's bedroom. When it got to the violent stage we said, no, we have got to protect him, he added. The court has heard how Harry Ife, 32, called 999 on the 22nd of August saying that his younger brother had been complaining of dehydration. Paramedics who arrived at the house were told Mr. Ife had been behaving abnormally over 3 days. Mr. Ife was said to have become very agitated and developed breathing difficulties. Despite efforts to resuscitate him, he was pronounced dead at 10:17 a.m. While police were at the house, Colin Ife allegedly carried out an attempted resurrection by chanting and praying for Mr. Ife. The court heard that a post-mortem examination revealed more than 60 injuries on Mr. Ife's body, including a possible bite. His father, who is based in Nigeria, was found to also have a bite injury on the shoulder, while 4 of the brothers also had minor injuries. Colin Ife, his parents Kenneth and Josephine, and brothers Roy, Harry, Samuel and Daniel are on trial at the Old Bailey accused of manslaughter. The 7 defendants deny manslaughter, false imprisonment and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult between 19 and the 23rd of August 2016. Prosecutor Tom Little QC had previously told the court Mr. Ife died because his own family decided that because he had become and remained unwell, he should be restrained. Whether this was some form of exorcism will be a matter for you in due course, Mr. Little said. In short, the Ife family took the law into their own hands. The Old Bailey heard his parents and brothers mistakenly believed he was possessed by evil spirits, so they set about curing him. The prosecution claimed the IT consultant was restrained for 67 hours at the 7-bedroom Enfield mansion and treated like an animal or detainee. But Mr. Ife's parents, Kenneth, 64, and Josephine, 56, along with his brothers Roy, aged 33, Harry, aged 32, Colin, aged 26, Samuel, aged 20, and Daniel, aged 20, denied the charges. Jurors heard the family held deep religious beliefs and were connected with the Jesus Sanctuary Ministries in southeast London. The court was told, on August 19, 2016, Kennedy Ife became aggressive, bit his father and threatened to cut off his own penis, so his mother sought advice from a minister rather than seeking medical help. Rather than taking him to see a GP, his mother, known at the church as Sister Joe, sought advice from a minister. The family then set about attempting to cure Kennedy, through restraint and prayer over the next 3 days. Roy Ife said his brother's actions were shocking to hear, but he did not consider calling professional help because it was a domestic issue. Kenneth Ife told jurors he ordered his sons to take shifts and use overwhelming force, but denied that an association with cults, occults and secret societies played any part in the death. The 26-year-old was pronounced dead after Harry Ife called emergency services saying his brother had been complaining of dehydration. An investigation was launched by detectives from the Homicide and Major Crime Command after a post-mortem examination conducted the following day established the cause of death as cardiorespiratory arrest in association with restraint and acute behavioral disturbance. A jury deliberated over 4 days to find them not guilty of manslaughter, false imprisonment and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. Anneliese Michel was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites during the year before her death. She died of malnutrition, for which her parents and priest were convicted of negligent homicide. She was diagnosed with epileptic psychosis, which is temporal lobe epilepsy, and had a history of psychiatric treatment that proved ineffective. When Michel was 16, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time that she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. Her condition worsened despite medication, and she became suicidal, also displaying other symptoms, for which she took medication as well. After taking psychiatric medications for 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Michel and her family became convinced she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. While rejected at first, 2 priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. The priests began conducting exorcism sessions and the parents stopped consulting doctors. Anneliese Michel stopped eating food and died of malnourishment and dehydration after 67 exorcism sessions. Michel's parents and the 2 Roman Catholic priests were found guilty of negligent homicide and were sentenced to 6 months in jail, reduced to 3 years of probation, as well as a fine. In a conference several years later, German bishops retracted the claim that she was possessed. In June 1970, Michel had a 3rd seizure at the psychiatric hospital where she had been staying. She was prescribed anticonvulsive drugs for the first time, including Dilantin, which did not alleviate the problem. She described seeing devil faces at various times of the day. That same month, she was prescribed Aalept, which is similar to chlorpromazine and is used in the treatment of various psychoses including schizophrenia, disturbed behavior, and delusions. By 1973, she began experiencing depression, hallucinated while praying and complained about hearing voices telling her that she was damned and would rot in hell. Michel's treatment in a psychiatric hospital did not improve her health and her depression worsened. Long-term treatment also did not help, and she grew increasingly frustrated with her medical care after having taken pharmacological drugs for 5 years. Michel became intolerant of Christian sacred places and objects, such as the crucifix. Michel visited San Damiano with a family friend who regularly organized Christian pilgrimages. Her escort concluded that she was suffering from demonic possession because she was unable to walk past a crucifix and refused to drink the water of the local Christian holy spring. She was unable to enter the shrine. She approached it with the greatest hesitation, then said that the soil burned like fire and she simply could not stand it. She then walked around the shrine in a wide arc and tried to approach it from the back. She looked at the people who were kneeling in the area surrounding the little garden, and it seemed to her that while praying they were gnashing their teeth. She got as far as the edge of the little garden, then she had to turn back. Coming from the front again, she had to avert her glance from the picture of Christ in the chapel of the house. She made it several times to the garden, but could not get past it. She also noted that she could no longer look at medals or pictures of saints, they sparkled so immensely that she could not stand it. Michel's family and the local community became convinced that she was possessed and consulted several priests to request an exorcism. The priests declined, recommended the continuation of medical treatment and informed the family that exorcisms required the bishop's permission. In the Catholic Church, official approval for an exorcism is granted when the subject strictly meets the set criteria and is considered to be suffering from possession and under demonic control. Intense dislike for religious objects and supernatural powers are some of the first indications. Michel worsened physically and displayed aggression, injured herself, drank her own urine and ate insects. In November 1973, Michelle began treatment with Tegretol, an anti-seizure drug, and mood stabilizer. She was prescribed antipsychotic drugs during the course of the religious rites and consumed them frequently until some time before her death. Despite taking these neuroleptic medications, Michelle's symptoms worsened and she began growling, seeing demons, and throwing things. The priest Father Ernst Alt declared that Michelle didn't look like an epileptic and that he did not observe her experiencing seizures. Alt believed that she was suffering from demonic possession and urged the local bishop to allow an exorcism. In a letter to Alt in 1975, Michelle wrote, "I am nothing, everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me," and also once told him, "I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." In September 1975, Bishop Joseph Stangl granted Father Arnold Renz permission to perform an exorcism according to the Rituale Romanum, but ordered total secrecy. Renz performed the first session on the 24th of September. Michelle began increasingly speaking about dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the priests of the modern church. Her parents stopped consulting doctors at her request and relied solely on the exorcism rites. A total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 or 2 each week lasting up to 4 hours each, were performed over approximately 10 months in 1975 and 1976. On the 1st of July 1976, Michelle died in her home. The autopsy report stated the cause of death as malnutrition and dehydration resulting from almost a year in a state of near starvation while the rites of exorcism were performed. She weighed 30 kilograms, 66 pounds, suffered broken knees from continuous genuflections, was unable to move without assistance and was reported to have contracted pneumonia. After an investigation, the state prosecutor maintained that Michelle's death could have been prevented as late as 1 week before she died. In 1976, the state charged Michelle's parents and priests, Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, with negligent homicide. The parents were defended by famed Nuremberg trials defense attorney Erich Schmidt-Leichner, and the priest's defense counsel was paid by the church. The state recommended that none of the involved parties be jailed. Instead, the recommended sentence for the priests was a fine, while the prosecution concluded that the parents should be exempt from punishment as they had suffered enough, a mitigating legal factor in German penal law. The trial began on the 30th of March 1978 in the district court and drew intense interest. Doctors testified that Michelle was not possessed, stating that the manifestations of demonic possession were a psychological effect of her strict religious upbringing as well as her epilepsy. Dr. Richard Roth, whom Alt had consulted for medical help, allegedly told Michelle during the exorcism that there is no injection against the devil. Schmidt-Leichner argued that the exorcism was legal and that the German constitution protected citizens in the unrestricted exercise of their religious beliefs. The defense played tapes recorded at the exorcism sessions, sometimes featuring what was claimed to be demons arguing to assert their claim that Michelle was possessed. Both priests claimed that the demons identified themselves as Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, Belial, Legion, Hitler, and Nero, among others. They also stated that Michelle was finally freed of demonic possession resulting from the exorcism just before her death. Bishop Stangl said that he was not aware of Michelle's alarming health condition when he approved of the exorcism and did not testify in court. In April 1978, the Michelles and the 2 priests were convicted of negligent homicide but were given suspended prison sentences, and they were ordered to share the costs of the legal proceedings. The sentences have been described as stiffer than those requested by the prosecutor, who had asked that the priests only be fined and that the parents be found guilty but not punished. By approving the ancient exorcism rite, the church drew public and media attention. According to author John M. Duffy, the case was a misidentification of mental illness. In a conference several years later, German bishops retracted the claim that she was possessed. After the trial, the Michelles asked the authorities for permission to exhume the remains of their daughter because she had been buried in undue hurry in a cheap coffin. Almost 2 years after the burial, on the 25th of February 1978, her remains were replaced in a new oak coffin lined with tin. The official reports state that the body bore signs consistent with the deterioration of a corpse of that age. The family and the priests were discouraged from viewing Michelle's remains. Father Renz later stated that he had been prevented from entering the mortuary. Michelle's gravesite remains a pilgrimage site as she is revered by small groups of Catholics who believe she atoned for wayward priests and sinful youth. The number of officially sanctioned exorcisms decreased in Germany following the ordeal despite Pope Benedict XVI's support for wider use of the practice as compared to that of his predecessor Pope John Paul II, who in 1999 tightened the rules to permit only rare cases for exorcisms. Anneliese's father, Joseph Michel, died in 1999. In a 2006 interview, Anna Michel stated that she does not regret her actions, saying, "I know we did the right thing because I saw the sign of Christ in her hands." On the 6th of June 2013, a fire engulfed the house where Michel had lived. Although the local police determined that it was a case of arson, some locals attributed the fire to the exorcism case. In 1974, in a case that shocked the nation, a particularly violent and shocking murder was committed by a peaceful and loving family man, who was overcome either by inner demons, or literal ones. Ossett is a market town near the city of Wakefield, in the English county of West Yorkshire, and the kind of town that wouldn't strike most people as the sort of place where a bloody horrific murder and talk of exorcisms and demonic possession would stem from. But it is in Ossett where the sinister story begins. The Taylor family called the Ossett district of Havercroft their home in 1974, and this family consisted of 31-year-old Michael Taylor, his wife Christine, their 5 children, and their family dog. The family and their home were considered mostly a cheerful and happy one by their friends and neighbors, and Michael in particular was described by those who knew him as mild-mannered, but a generally kind and loving father and husband. It was noted that he was sometimes prone to minor bouts of depression, the cause of which had been due to a severe back injury he had received a number of years before, and which had left him with chronic pain and an inability to find long-term employment. Apart from this observation, nothing else seemed to be amiss or unusual in the Taylor household. At the time, Ossett had a highly religious population and most people regularly attended church, but the Taylors had never been particularly devout, mostly skipping church services that were held near where they lived. In a belief that Michael's periods of depression could be somehow eased with a spiritual intervention, a friend of Michael's called Barbara Wardman took it upon herself to introduce him to a church group called the Christian Fellowship Group, which was led by 21-year-old Pastor Marie Robinson. Whereas Michael had previously been non-religious, he soon began to attend regular meetings of the group, and he became an active member of the congregation. He became well acquainted with their teachings, and quickly fell under the spell of the charismatic Marie Robinson. Michael began spending what seemed an inappropriate amount of time with Robinson, attending more and more meetings and gatherings of the group, and joining Robinson in congregations where they would use the power of God to exorcise people of their sins and speak in tongues. They also began to engage in private rituals, in which both Michael and Robinson would stay up all night making the sign of the cross at each other in order to ward off what they believed was the evil power of the full moon. In fact, it soon became clear to the rest of the congregation that Michael had become rather enamored with Robinson. Unsurprisingly, Michael's attitude at home towards his family began to change as a result. He was spending less and less time at home with them, and when he was there he was sullen, irritable, and very argumentative. This was a total character change from the easygoing and peaceful way Michael had once been, and the assumption was that the church group was somehow exerting a negative influence on him. The character change and increasingly bizarre beliefs, erratic behavior, and bad attitude were clear to see to anyone who knew him. But most notably to Christine Taylor, on whom it was not lost that Michael had an infatuation with Robinson. During one congregation, Christine suddenly decided to publicly confront Michael about his relationship with Robinson, and openly accused him in front of people of being unfaithful. It was at this point that Michael's behavior would take a turn for the worse. Michael is reported to have felt an evil influence cast a shadow over him, and then compelled by this force, vented a sudden fury on surprisingly not Christine, but Robinson. He lashed out at her, verbally and physically, to the point that several other churchgoers in the congregation had to physically restrain him, fearing that he would seriously hurt himself or someone else. Perhaps as a good example of the religious mania that was running through the group, Marie Robinson herself later testified as to what happened when Michael attacked her. She said,
"I suddenly glanced at Mike and his whole features changed. He looked almost bestial. He kept looking at me and there was a really wild look in his eyes. I started screaming at him out of fear. I started speaking in tongues. Mike also screamed at me in tongues. I was on the verge of death and I seemed to come to my senses. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying over and over again, Jesus." When Christine, heard me calling on the name of Jesus, she started saying it too, and I believe firmly that it was only by calling on his name that I was not killed.
Michael would claim later to have had no memory of this incident. Surprisingly, despite this frightening violent outburst, the following day Michael was to receive full forgiveness and a church absolution from Robinson for what had happened. But none of the rest of the congregation could forget the outburst, and Michael was closely watched following this episode. It soon became apparent that his deteriorating, out-of-character behavior seemed to now be permanent, and was in fact getting worse as time went on, with his sanity clearly slipping. The seriousness and frightening condition that Michael was in was so severe that several local ministers became involved, and came to the realization that Michael might be under the influence of demonic forces. Finally, the local vicar came to the controversial conclusion that an exorcism should be performed on Michael. Two ministers, by the names of Father Peter Vincent and the Reverend Raymond Smith, were brought in to carry it out, and the exorcism was set to happen for midnight on the 5th of October, 1974, at St. Thames Church in Barnsley. That night, in front of the congregation of the Christian Fellowship Group, the two ministers began the harrowing ritual, which would prove to last throughout the night and well into the next morning. As soon as the exorcism had started, Michael went into uncontrollable convulsions and fits, and bouts of scratching, spitting, and biting, requiring him to be forcefully tied to the floor. Over the next 8 hours, Michael was subjected to all sorts of indignities, such as having crucifixes shoved into his mouth and being doused with holy water. All throughout, Michael was growling and snapping at anyone who came near him. The priests in charge of the exorcism claimed that the ceremony had managed to ascertain that there were about 40 demons inhabiting Michael's body, representing such traits as incest, bestiality, blasphemy, lewdness, heresy, masochism, and carnal knowledge. As one can imagine, these alleged demons did not go easily from Michael, each one having to be reportedly dragged out kicking and screaming. After 8 hours of this, by 8 a.m. on October 6, 1974, the priests carrying out the exorcism could no longer continue through exhaustion. Strangely, it was decided that the exorcism would have to be finished at a later time, although the priests claimed that 3 demons, those of insanity, anger, and murder, were still stubbornly possessing Michael and had not been successfully removed yet. Apparently, the congregation who had been present for the exorcism agreed in part, for one witness to the terrifying events, a minister's wife named Margaret Smith, was to claim later that she had received a warning in her mind from what she believed to be God, saying that the demon of murder was going to escape from Michael and kill Christine. She pleaded with the 2 priests to complete the exorcism, but they dismissed her warnings and instead told Michael and Christine to go home to rest and prepare for the next and final part of the exorcism, which was to be performed the following day. Now, whether there were really demons still infesting Michael Taylor's body or not, or whether he had succumbed to a full-on psychosis and had been tipped over the edge by the events of that night, what would follow that day was nothing short of pure evil and insanity. It was about 9:45 the next morning, October 7th, and not 2 hours after Michael and Christine had been sent home to rest up to prepare for the next part of the exorcism, that a police patrol car passing through the normally quiet streets of Ossett came upon a shocking and unnerving sight. Coming around a corner, the officer in the car, PC Ian Walker, was confronted by the sight of a man stumbling around in the middle of the street, naked, and covered head to toe in blood. His body was slicked with it. Stopping the car and approaching the man, P.C. Walker saw the man curl into the fetal position and heard him ranting and screaming over and over. Unsurprisingly, this had attracted a crowd of onlookers, some of whom knew the disturbed man. The police officers who had approached the man immediately called for an ambulance, fearing that Michael had hurt himself or someone else, and tried his best to talk to Michael, who was still screaming and senseless, ranting only about Satan. He continued screaming as the ambulance from the local hospital arrived, and he was placed into it and taken away. The crowd of onlookers who had crowded around the ambulance now told the police that the deranged maniac was Michael Taylor, and gave the officer his address, to which the patrol car then went to. P.C. Walker, upon arrival at the Taylor house, was surprised and perhaps apprehensive to find a police car there already, which he later found out had been summoned for by frightened neighbors who had heard a commotion. P.C. Walker approached the house but was stopped by the sight of his inspector emerging from the front door, bending over, and vomiting.
"You don't want to see this one, son. I've seen nothing like it before, and I've seen a few. It's the wife. He's ripped at her. It's a right mess in there. There's not much of her left. You don't want to see it."
Feeling that he had to go in, P.C. Walker stepped into the Taylor house and was to see exactly what his inspector had meant. The interior of the front room was destroyed, with signs of destruction apparent even from a cursory look. Blood covered every surface of the room, along with flesh, pulp and brain matter, and on the floor of the living room lay the bodies of Christine Taylor and the family pet dog, almost unrecognizable. The blood that had covered Michael Taylor was Christine's blood. At about 9:30 that morning, in the Taylor family home, Michael had killed his wife Christine, the woman that he loved and the mother of his children. In a maniacal and deranged attack, Michael had stripped off and strangled Christine, and had literally torn off her face. There was no murder weapon involved. He had gouged out her eyes and ripped out her tongue with his bare hands, tearing the rest of her face down to the bone, so much so that she was left unrecognizable. Whilst Christine had died of shock and asphyxiation on her own blood, mercifully quickly, Michael had turned his attentions to the Taylor pet dog, strangling it and literally ripping it limb from limb. He had torn its legs from their sockets, and hair and teeth and eyes from the skull. He then left the house screaming, and was found by P.C. Walker a short time later. It was described as being the most horrific crime scene that any police officer who had attended it was ever to see. Michael was taken into police custody from the hospital, and when interviewed some hours later, when he was deemed rational enough to talk, he was asked to try to explain what had happened. He told Detective Inspector Brian Smith about the exorcism that had occurred only hours before, saying,
"It was a long night. They danced around me, and burned my cross because it was tainted with the evil. They had me in the church all night. Look at my hands. I was banging on the floor. The power was in me. I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could they. They were too late. I was compelled by a force within me to destroy everything living within the house."
Although Michael claimed he could remember nothing of the actual murder, claiming to deeply love his wife, when asked by D.I. Smith how he felt, Michael replied,
"Released. I am released. It is done. The evil in her has been destroyed."
Although he appeared to have no motive for his actions, Michael Taylor was charged with the murder of Christine Taylor and was remanded to Broadmoor Secure Hospital in Berkshire to await trial. Whilst on remand, Michael was reported to have spent most of the time in silence or sleeping. Perhaps some part of him never wanted to face what had happened, and how 5 children had in the space of a single day lost a mother and a father. The crime was a sensation. Horror such as this belongs in fiction and should not happen anywhere, let alone in a sleepy Yorkshire market town. It created a media frenzy, and the bloody crime, coupled with the background of exorcisms and alleged demonic possession, drew huge amounts of interest to Michael Taylor's upcoming trial. Michael Taylor's trial for the murder of his wife Christine began in March 1975, and upon it commencing, the jury was advised by the barrister for the prosecution, Mr. Geoffrey Baker QC, that the evidence they were about to hear
will make it difficult to believe that you are not back in the Middle Ages.
Neither the prosecution nor the defense denied at the trial that Michael Taylor had severe mental issues. Michael himself testified, again claiming that he had no recollection of the actual killing, that he had deeply loved his wife and had been under the control of evil supernatural forces, and that he had suspected that Christine had also been possessed by demons. He offered no other explanation. The linchpin of his defense was the discrediting of the Christian Fellowship Group, and the Anglican and Methodist priests who had carried out the exorcism. Mr. Ognall QC, for the defense, claimed that the Christian Fellowship Prayer Group was actually more of a fanatical cult, and had managed to influence Michael by using potent mind control and indoctrination, feeding his already existing mental issues. At one point, he described the group as neurotics, feeding neurosis to a neurotic. Blame was also apportioned to the exorcism itself. The prosecution claimed that the ritual had taken its toll on an already mentally disturbed man, and coupled with the warped religious ideals and beliefs that the prayer group had instilled in him, these negative influences had pushed Michael over the edge into a realm of madness and murder. Mr. Ognall made an impassioned personal statement during the trial that illustrated just how much responsibility the church was viewed to have held in the horrific crime, saying, "I am aware that it is generally regarded as improper for an advocate to express any personal feeling or opinion about the case in which he is engaged. I am afraid I find it quite impossible to observe such constraints in this case. Let those who truly are responsible for this killing stand up. We submit that Taylor is a mere cipher. The real guilt lies elsewhere. Religion is the key. Those who have been referred to in evidence, and those clerics in particular, should be with him in spirit now in this building and each day he is incarcerated in Broadmoor, and not least on the day he must endure the bitter reunion with his 5 motherless children." The jury found Michael Taylor not guilty of the murder of his wife by reason of insanity. Deemed to be both clinically and legally insane, he was sent to Broadmoor Secure Hospital, where he would remain for 2 years, followed by another 2-year sentence at Bradford Royal Infirmary before being released back into the world, apparently cured. The aftermath of the trial was a public outcry over the use of exorcisms within the church, and indeed this became the last recorded exorcism to be carried out by the Anglican Church. But they defended themselves to the full. Throughout the trial, and in the years following it, the chief Anglican priest who had been in charge of Michael's exorcism, Father Peter Vincent, continued to insist that Michael Taylor had indeed been inhabited by demons, and that the Ossett case had indeed been an authentic case of demonic possession. Father Vincent's career in the church was unaffected following the case, and even he seemed to be, almost having little consideration for a family destroyed and the horror of what had happened. He would only simply say,
"God will bring good out of this, in his own way."
It was only Peter Vincent's partner in exorcism, the Reverend Raymond Smith, who seemed to admit that the situation had not been handled well and that the exorcism had indeed failed. He was quoted as saying,
"If people come to me in trouble of any kind, I will try to help. I would give such comfort as I could, but I am only an ordinary human being, with human failings."
After his release from hospital, it is reported that Michael Taylor went back to live in Ossett. He would continue to display odd behavior and to suffer bouts of depression, as well as making a total of 4 suicide attempts over the following years, still haunted by his actions that October morning. These involved cutting his wrists and jumping from a bridge, in which he badly injured his back and legs. Surprisingly for such a sensational and chilling crime, he dropped out of the news and the public eye for many years. But Michael Taylor would enter the news again in July 2005, when he was arrested for sexually harassing and having inappropriate conduct with an underage girl. During his court hearing on these charges, Taylor was said to have told police that it was all his fault, and then said,
"Am I going to Broadmoor for murdering my wife?"
Taylor had spent a week in custody over the sexual assaults, and during this incarceration the psychiatric problems that had existed in 1975 had manifested themselves once again. Upon being bailed, however, they had disappeared. His previous charges from 30 years before were deemed to have no bearing on the current case, and he was deemed to have a low to medium risk of re-offending. This led him to a relatively light sentence of a 3-year stint of community service, but with a condition of psychiatric treatment. The case of Michael Taylor and the Ossett exorcist murder raises many questions for debate. Could someone who had committed such a horrific crime and was found insane really be well enough to rejoin society within 4 years? Is evil an outside force that can infect a person, or does it always lurk within? It perhaps ventures into the realms of the supernatural, but what if there really are such things as demons that can possess a person and drive them to commit heinous or violent acts that that person would normally never commit? Or is it just simply a form of psychosis? Many people connected with the Ossett murder will have debated these points long and hard over the years they have had to remember and think about it. 5 children, who undoubtedly have families of their own now, lost a mother in a horrific way that they will never forget. How do you even begin to rebuild your life following such horrific events? Michael Taylor himself has been so tortured by not being able to understand his actions that he has attempted suicide 4 times. Members of the jury and the court who sat through the trial will never forget what must have been some of the most horrific crime scene photographs ever shown in a court, and the disturbing and frightening accounts that they were to hear. But perhaps the effect that the case was to have on people is best summed up by an account given by PC Ian Walker, when interviewed about the case as one of the officers on the scene years after his retirement. He said,
"Of all the incidents in which I was involved in 30 years of police work, nothing affected me like this one. The stupidity and futility of it all, the complete and utter waste of life, and destruction of a family, not to mention the death and other traumas, are far beyond anything else I have ever come across. Obviously, my wife asked questions, but there are some things that you do not take home, and this was one of them. However, within the next 24 to 48 hours the news hit the national newspapers and the TV news bulletins. You just bury it and get on with your life as best you can. Before this event I was agnostic. And now I was an atheist."
It all began after going to clean up a rental property they had just acquired. David recalled an old man suddenly appeared, pushing and terrifying him. The couple initially thought David was using the old man as an excuse to avoid cleaning, but David informed them that the old man had vowed to harm the Glatzels if they moved into the rental home. David's visions of the old man included the man appearing as a demonic beast who muttered Latin and threatened to steal his soul. Although the family allegedly heard strange noises coming from the attic, no one but David ever witnessed the old man. After David experienced night terrors, exhibited strange behavior, and obtained unexplained scratches and bruises, the family called upon the services of a Catholic priest, who attempted to bless the house. The terrified family concluded that the house was evil and would no longer continue to rent it. David's visions worsened, occurring in the daytime as well. 12 days after the original incident, the family summoned the demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren to assist. Lorraine witnessed a black mist materialize next to David, an indication of a malevolent presence. Debbie and her mother told the Warrens they had seen David being beaten and choked by invisible hands and that red marks had appeared on his neck afterwards. David had started to growl, hiss, speak in otherworldly voices, and recite passages from the Bible or Paradise Lost. The Glatzels recounted how each night a family member would remain awake with David as he suffered through spasms and convulsions. After receiving a prognosis of multiple possessions from the Warrens, David was subjected to 3 lesser exorcisms. Lorraine asserts that David levitated, ceased breathing for a time, and even demonstrated the supernatural ability of precognition, specifically in relation to the manslaughter Johnson would later commit. In October 1980, the Warrens contacted Brookfield police to warn them that the situation was becoming dangerous. Arne Johnson coerced one of the demons, purportedly within David, to possess him while participating in David's exorcisms. A few days after Johnson egged the demon, he was attacked rather viciously by the demon, who allegedly took control of his car and forced it into a tree, but Johnson was unharmed. After this incident, Johnson returned to the rental property to examine an old well that supposedly housed the demon. In both the dramatized version and his personal account, Johnson said that this was his final encounter with the demon while completely lucid. After encountering the demon at the well, and making eye contact with it, he became possessed. The Warrens claim to have warned him not to do this, although their warning was not mentioned in A Haunting. As David's condition worsened further, Debbie and Johnson, who had been living in her mother's home, decided it was time to move. Debbie was hired by Alan Bono, a new resident in Brookfield, as a dog groomer. Debbie and Johnson began renting an apartment close to her place of employment. After moving in, Johnson started to exhibit odd behavior that was strikingly similar to David's, causing Debbie to fear that he had become possessed as well. According to Debbie, Johnson would fall into a trance-like state, wherein he would growl and hallucinate but later have no memory of it. On February 16, 1981, Johnson called in sick to his job at Right Tree Service and joined Debbie at the kennel where she worked, along with his sister Wanda and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary. Bono, the couple's landlord and Debbie's employer at the kennel, bought the group lunch at a local bar and proceeded to drink heavily. After lunch, the group returned to the kennel. Debbie then took the girls to get pizza but insisted they return quickly, anticipating trouble. When they returned, Bono, intoxicated at this point, became agitated. Everyone left the room at Debbie's urging, except Bono, who seized Mary and refused to let go. Johnson headed back to the apartment and ordered Bono to release Mary. Wanda recounted the following events to the police. Mary ran for the car as Debbie attempted to mitigate the situation by standing between the two men. Wanda tried in vain to pull Johnson away. Johnson, growling like an animal, then drew a 5-inch, 13 centimeters, pocket knife and stabbed Bono repeatedly. Bono died several hours later. According to Johnson's lawyer, Bono had suffered 4 or 5 tremendous wounds, mostly to his chest, and one that stretched from his stomach to the base of his heart. Johnson was discovered 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers, from the site of the killing. Sergeant Gordon Fairchild of the Brookfield Police Department said he helped arrest Johnson on a charge of assault, while Alan Bono was still being treated at the hospital. He said Johnson told him he did not mean to hurt anyone and was unable to remember anything. While putting him into a police cruiser, Johnson said, "I need help because I've got a drinking problem." When Johnson was informed at police headquarters that Bono had died, Fairchild said the suspect became incoherent and then fell asleep for 20 to 25 minutes. When Johnson awoke, Police Detective Sergeant John Lucas advised him of his rights and charged Arne Johnson with first-degree murder. He was held at the Bridgeport Correctional Center on bail of $125,000. This was the first unlawful killing in the history of Brookfield, Connecticut. The trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson, also known as the Devil Made Me Do It case, is the first known court case in the United States in which the defense sought to prove innocence based upon the claim of demonic possession and the denial of personal responsibility for the crime. On November 24, 1981, in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arne Cheyenne Johnson was convicted of first-degree manslaughter for the killing of his landlord, Alan Bono. According to testimony by the Glatzel family, 12-year-old David Glatzel allegedly had played host to a demon. After witnessing a number of increasingly ominous occurrences involving David, his family, exhausted and terrified, decided to enlist the aid of Ed and Lorraine Warren in a last-ditch effort to cure the child. The Glatzel family, along with the Warrens, then proceeded to have multiple priests petition the Catholic Church to have a formal exorcism performed on David. The process continued for several days, concluding when, according to those present, a demon fled the child's body and took up residence within Johnson. Several months later, Johnson killed his landlord during a party. His defense lawyer argued in court that he was possessed, but the judge ruled that such a defense could never be proven and was therefore infeasible in a court of law. Johnson was subsequently convicted, though he served only 5 years of a 10 to 20-year sentence. The trial attracted media attention from around the world and has obtained a level of notoriety due to numerous depictions of the events in literature and television. A live-action TV prequel titled Where Demons Dwell was released on August 31, 2006. The story was later made into a film adaptation titled The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It in 2021. The day after the killing, Lorraine Warren informed the Brookfield police that Johnson was possessed when the crime was committed. A media blitz soon surrounded the story, fueled in part by the Warrens, whose agents promised that lectures, a book, and a movie detailing the gruesome case were in the works. Martin Minella, Johnson's lawyer, received calls from all over the world about what was being called the Demon murder trial. Minella traveled to England to meet with lawyers who had been involved in two similar cases, though neither went to trial. He planned to bring in exorcism specialists from Europe and threatened to subpoena the priests who oversaw David Glatzel's exorcisms if they did not cooperate with the defense. The trial took place in Connecticut's Superior Court in Danbury, beginning on October 28, 1981. Minella attempted to submit a plea of not guilty by virtue of possession, but the presiding judge, Robert Callahan, promptly rejected this defense. Callahan argued that no such defense could ever exist in a court of law due to lack of evidence and that it would be irrelative and unscientific to allow related testimony. The defense chose to imply that Johnson acted in self-defense. Because of this, the jury was not legally allowed to consider demonic possession as a viable explanation for the killing. The jury deliberated for 15 hours over 3 days before convicting Johnson on November 24, 1981, of first-degree manslaughter. On December 18, 1981, he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, though he served only 5, or approximately 1 month short of 5 years. The incident led to the creation of a television film titled The Demon Murder Case on NBC and preparations for a feature film, the production of which was stalled due to internal conflicts. In 1983, Gerald Brittle, with the assistance of Lorraine Warren, published a book about the incident entitled The Devil in Connecticut. Lorraine Warren stated that profits from the book were shared with the family. Sources confirmed that $2,000 was paid to the murderer's family by the book publisher. Upon the book's republication in 2006 by iUniverse, David Glatzel and his brother, Carl Glatzel Jr., sued the authors and book publishers for violating their right to privacy, libel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Carl also claimed that the book alleged he committed criminal and abusive acts against his family and others. He said that the possession story was a hoax concocted by Ed and Lorraine Warren to exploit the family and his brother's mental illness, and that the book presented him as the villain because he did not believe in the supernatural claims. He asserted that the Warrens told him the story would make the family millionaires and would help get Johnson out of jail. According to Carl Glatzel, the publicity generated by the incident forced him to drop out of school and lose friends and business opportunities. In 2007 he began writing a book, titled Alone Through the Valley, about his version of the events surrounding his brother. Lorraine Warren defended her work with the family, claiming that the 6 priests who were involved in the incident agreed at the time that the boy was possessed and that the supernatural events she described were real. No independent verification of this claim about the priest's alleged views was provided. Brittle, author of The Devil in Connecticut, says he wrote the book because the family wanted the story told, that he possesses videos of over 100 hours of his interviews with the family, and that they signed off on the book as accurate before it went to print. Glatzel's father, Carl Glatzel Sr., denies telling the author that his son was possessed. Johnson and Debbie, now married, wholeheartedly support the Warrens' account of demonic possession and have stated that the Glatzels in question are suing simply for monetary purposes.